What is up, martial arts fanatics? Welcome back. As always, I'm Coach Greg, and today we're doing another Q&A with the coach. Please don't forget, if you do have a question, make sure you click on the link in the description below. If you just post it in the comments, it's very likely it's going to get just lost in the sauce. So please make sure that you are clicking on the link so that I can track these. Today's question comes from a longtime friend of the channel, the martial artist, who he asked the question, why is there so much turnover for champions, right? Why do guys not have these long fight win streaks where you have guys who go 50-0 like you see in boxing, or 200-0 like as you see it sometimes in Muay Thai, right? These guys with like 250-2, right, for their records. And so why is there so much turnover? Why is it rare to see guys with more than like a 5-fight win streak? And even 5 is pretty phenomenal. To see guys with going past a 3 to 4 fight win streak is impressive. Why is that? And he goes on to state that kind of his belief is that because everybody in MMA fits this kind of cookie cutter mold, that it gives everybody kind of a 50-50 chance at winning. And, you know, I strongly disagree with this sentiment. And like I said, martial artist is a longtime friend of the channel, very passionate about martial arts, but I disagree with this, and I'm going to explain why. To begin with, let's talk about the cookie cutter thing. I think you are less likely to find a cookie cutter fighter in MMA than any other combat sport. And the reason for that is, yes, you do have to cover a lot of bases, so there's certain things that everybody has to cover. It's your fundamentals of MMA, right? But you also have a lot of specialists, and especially when you talk about at a champion level, generally speaking, to be a champion in the UFC means that you have to be a specialist and one of the best in the world at one thing, elite at 3 to 4 other things, and able to shut down people's games in even more things, 9 to 10 things, right? Compare that with something like boxing. Boxing, you do have a lot of different styles of boxing that guys come up, and generally what coaches do is they kind of pad records. They put them up against guys. If you have a guy who's like, this guy's elite quality, I'm going to put him up against a couple guys that I'm pretty sure he can beat. That'll give him some different looks, right? But ultimately, it's still all kind of boxing, right? And so if you are a boxer, you're going to fight other boxers that, even though, yes, you have a Philly shell, you have peekaboo, you have Cuban style, Russian, outside boxing, like you have all these different styles of boxing, but they're still ultimately boxing, right? You have southpaw, they're still generally boxing. And so you develop systems for dealing with these different styles, but ultimately you're still in the same rule set. And the more limited the rule set, the more it tends to leave itself for people with natural attributes to be more successful in. Compare that with MMA, where you have a wide array of different things you have to deal with. And by the way, it's not just boxing. I mean, if you look at judo, you know, yes, you have different styles of judo. You have the Korean style, you have things that like the French do, certain grip breaks that you can expect, and like all these different things that you can expect, but ultimately it's still judo, right? The more limited the rule set is, the more it becomes reliant on natural attributes, and the more cookie cutter it tends to be because you have to find ways to be successful within that rule set. If you look at the highest level of Taekwondo, everybody pretty much fights the same. There are some exceptions, but pretty much everybody fights the same. Within MMA, because the rule set is so much more open, you have a wide array of different things to expect. What that means is if you are a champion in the UFC, you might have a fight where your next fight is against a Philly shell boxer, who, somebody like a Sean Strickland, who has come up and that is what his A game is. He is the best there is in MMA at using a Philly shell and using, you know, defending leg kicks, defending kicking, defending takedowns, putting pressure, right? This is a guy who is specialized in this. Your next fight, you might find another type of specialist. Maybe it's a guy who specializes in triangles, like a Brian Ortega, or a guy who has just an amazing guillotine, right? You might have different types of grapplers that you have to deal with. Somebody who's a very top-oriented jiu-jitsu guy, like a Charles Oliveira. Somebody with an amazing guard game, like a Gilbert Burns. Like, each of these guys is vastly different, and every fight you have a different look. Then the next fight, you might have somebody who's going to just amazing at putting you up against the cage and dominating from that position. The next fight, you might have a world-class kickboxer. And every time you have a guy who is the best at their thing, and amazing at these other things, and you have to be able to overcome that with your game. Not only do you have to be better at your game than they are at theirs, but you have to be able to shut down their game, which means a very high level of expertise when encountering that. Because, like I said, if you're fighting a guy like Brian Ortega, all he's done his whole career is triangles, setting up and getting to the triangle and being successful. So you need to have a game plan and be able to specialize in a lot of different things. This is a very, very hard thing to do time and time and time again, especially at the highest level where everybody is super athletes and world class at what they do. On top of that, the consequences in MMA, you have less room for error in MMA than any other combat sport, in my opinion, particularly like your boxing and kickboxing, stuff like that. You know, if you slip up and you make a mistake in boxing, with the larger gloves, you have a more, and with the shorter rounds and the larger gloves, you have a higher likelihood of being able to weather that storm if you make a mistake and come back the next round and be able to win. There's more room for error in that sport. Same thing with kickboxing. You can have a mistake that doesn't just end the fight. But in MMA, you can have a perfect fight. Look at Kamaru Usman versus Leon Edwards. The first time they fought, Kamaru Usman had 5 almost perfect rounds against Leon Edwards, just destroying him every single round. Then at the end of it, he sits back a little bit because he's like, I got this fight in the bag. And Leon Edwards throws one kick and ends the fight. At no point can you have any room for error as a champion, especially in MMA, but in general. And not just with getting knocked out. There's also, look at Valentina Shevchenko, who throws a turning back kick, gets her hip check, gets her back taken, and that's it. Right? One mistake, and that's it. You have more room for error in a sport like boxing or kickboxing or taekwondo, where in taekwondo, you know, yes, you can get knocked out from that, but you also have a high likelihood that somebody scores points on you and come back, right? It's more possible to do it in these other sports. So the argument that everybody's cookie cutter, I don't think holds water. The argument that it's a 50-50 chance, I absolutely disagree with, because there are guys who are systematic. That's why we do system breakdowns on this channel, because there are guys who, when everybody's genetically amazing, why are there guys like Anderson Silva, who has this long fight win streak as a champion? Guys like your John Joneses. But even like George St. Pierre, like he got knocked out by Matt Serra, but overall, he wins time and time again because his systems allow him to do so. And so you do have to have ways of dealing with these different things and dealing with different solutions for different types of problems. But I do think that that does exist. You just don't have guys who go 50 fights, right? And part of that is also because you have much shorter careers in MMA, right? You don't have guys who have these long fights records. I think like at the top end of it, you got guys like Michael Bisping with like 39 fights. It's very rare to see that though. Most guys, a UFC career, you see, 10 to 20 fights, right? Average about 15 fights, and then they start getting to the end of their career. Like probably by the end of their career, most guys, if you do a 20-year career, you're looking at 20, 25 fights. It's just, you don't have as many fights because you can't fight as frequently. But the other thing I'll argue is that, MMA fighters don't dodge each other as much. It does exist. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. There are definitely guys who, when guys come up the ranks, people are like, I don't know if I want that, right? But I think that, especially when you talk about a top 5 guy not wanting to fight somebody below the top 10, because they're like, this guy's a killer, but I don't get anything out of this, right? I get that, but you have a lot less of that, and guys want to take exciting fights because they know, it still only increases your brand when you take great fights. Whereas boxing, because of the politics, nobody wants to blemish their records. Everybody dodges each other, right? It takes so long to get a big fight to happen. And so in MMA, yeah, you're going to have more losses, but you're going to have more exciting fights too, because you're going to take more chances to put on the kind of show that people want to watch. So that is my answer. Please feel free to put in the comments what you guys think, guys.